But I'm so glad that you're able to join us. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I know our readers are too. We've already gotten some great questions. But before we get to those, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your work?
Sure. Kaveh Madani. I'm a visiting scholar at Yale right now, and a visiting professor at Imperial College London. I've been working on water management, systems analysis, energy policy, climate change, and generally I develop complex human environmental systems models with the objective of advising policy and solving real world problems. I was an academic till a few years ago. That was the only thing I was doing with a lot of outreach work and working, interacting with policymakers, NGOs, activists, and real people. At some point, I was asked by the current government of Iran to go home and serve as the deputy head of Iran's Department of Environment. I tried. I said yes to this invitation and went home, and all the things that in the recent story of Reuters have been, I think, like articulated really well, happened to me. Sad story. I had to resign and get out of the country and try to help the people in Iran and the rest of the world remotely.
Yeah. Yeah, and for those who haven't read the story yet, I think we are allowed some spoilers here. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working for the Iranian government and why you had to flee?
Sure. And let me also take this, use this opportunity to thank Reuters and Motam for the great work, which has been done. 2 years ago, in June, I received an email from Mo, and he told me that he wanted to profile a few people, climate scientists that he had, Reuters had narrowed down and identified as people who do good research, but also have some impact on policy. And after 2 years, we know what has happened in the world over the past 2 years. We are at a stage that these stories have been told with all the difficulties, summarizing, kind of touching up the difficulties that scientists are facing around the world, climate change scientists, women, people in the developing world, people who have been trying really hard to sell science to the societies who don't like to hear things, or the policymakers who are reluctant to accept factual science. My story is also one of those stories. At the age of 36, I was asked by Iran to go back. I left Iran when I was 22, came out of Iran, did my graduate studies in Sweden and the United States. I was a researcher in the US, and then in the UK, teaching and training students and working on problems of the developing world, especially as well, like the Middle East area and Iran. I went home and tried to work. Now, my case was strange. A Western educated going to Iran with a system with certain ideology and trying to promote environmental awareness and fighting against corruption and some of the things which are happening in Iran in development during their development path, building dams and emitting greenhouse gases and lots of other things. The shadow government of Iran, the IRGC, didn't like me from day one. They harassed me. They arrested me upon arrival at the airport. They hacked my emails. They a lot of times I got interrogated by the intelligence system in Iran. Then a group of environmentalists in Iran, conservationists, some experts got arrested. One of them died, unfortunately, in prison. And this story continued. And eventually there was a time that I felt that I would be more helpful to Iran if I'm free and I'm out of the country. And it's sad, but it's a reality. And probably this is a story that many other environmental defenders are facing, actually, are going through in the developing world, in the global south, somewhere that we have no clue about and we don't understand and monitor, because most of the climate change, the influential climate change scientists come from the global north and come from the rich nations. And I think this is why I like the hot list collection, because it also pays attention to those people who are trying really hard in the developing world, where there is no resource to support their work, and with all these political stuff happening. I think it's a great work.
Yeah, definitely. That was one of the things I appreciated the most about your story, is that it drew so much attention to the issues that so many scientists from the developing world face. And you've talked about climate change as an issue of fairness as much as about science. Can you share a little bit of your perspective about climate change and equity globally?
So I headed, actually, I served as the head of Iran delegation at COP23 negotiations over the implementation of Paris Agreement. As a climate change scientist, I want this problem to be solved. I have worked on it. We know the solution. We know that, the theoretical solution, and how things, what solutions must be implemented to solve the problem. But when it comes to the implementation, the question is, who pays for it? Who provides technology, and what the process is going to look like. Those who come from the developing world, like myself, in the debates, argue that the industrial economies have created this problem. Their cumulative emissions since the Industrial Revolution is huge, and now they have to take responsibility for what they have done. They have bought, taken the oil from other countries, left them with the pollution and emissions. Their economies have grown, and they have made advancements. And now it's the turn, the developing world's turn to also, develop itself and improve the quality of the lives of its people. We understand that this is a common threat, and at the end, we are all going to go down. So the developing world, the developing nations appreciate that. But when it comes to the cost of action, who pays for it, how we do it, this is where we fight, because I think a lot of people think that the current solutions are not fair. It's not fair to have different qualities of life in different countries, and then ask certain nations to sacrifice more than others, to change their development path, and so many things. It doesn't mean that we cannot reach a solution. I think we are all positive that the solution is achievable. But in solving this problem, especially the academics in the West, the academics in the global North, need to understand the truth on the ground and the feeling that people have about fairness. Unless this solution is fair, people would not, be keen to implement it, even if it's win-win for all. And that's how I use, game theory to actually address this problem and try to come up with something practical.
That's so interesting. I'd love to get to some questions from the chat, where you're getting a lot of love from viewers in Iran.
Thank you.
Wants to know, how can we increase our public awareness about climate change in Iran?
I think Iran is going through an environmental revolution. The amount of attention of the Iranians as a nation to environmental matters is unprecedented. The current, the new generation is paying attention to the matter, of course, after seeing a lot of failures, a lot of damages to the environment. But if you compare Iran with the rest of the region, Iranians are certainly ahead of the curve. It is hard to talk about climate change and not talk about other things. And I think I always encourage the Iranians, the fellow Iranians, to talk about all problems that the country is facing, because all those problems, including water bankruptcy, air pollution, waste problems, deforestation, desertification, sand and dust storms, are all the byproducts of climate change. They are all going to get worsened by climate change. They also can contribute to climate change and make climate change worsen. So it is important to pay attention to all those. We have to talk about it. We have to talk about what is happening, how the emissions are hurting the whole world, and how the Iranians can play a more, I would say, a responsible role globally to address these problems. I think This is a problem that, Iran is inefficient in energy use in a lot of sectors. We as Iranians, like the Americans, are unfortunately wasteful when it comes to using natural resources. I think the change of lifestyle is possible in Iran, and talking about these things, talking to the next generation, talking to our kids about these things can make this environmental move, the current environmental movements in Iran more successful.
Great. Here's another one. What do you advise young people who are trying to build their future in their community?
To remain hopeful, and also not to be idealists, understand what is happening in the world, what is possible and achievable within boundaries. This is another complexity that people in the developing world face. In countries like Iran or the rest of the Middle East, for example, we have to talk about climate change, and we have to recognize climate change as a serious threat, and remind our politicians, our society about it, but also remind them that the current actions and decisions that are being made in the country, the changes in land use patterns, the damages that we cause to the ecosystem and so on, are causing the problems on the ground. And some of these problems might be even worse than the darkest scenarios that we will look at when it comes to climate change projections. We have to remain hopeful. We have to understand the limits that we have within those countries, and we have to understand how in the developing world, in Iran, rest of the region, how political economies are dependent on natural resources. We are not industrial countries. The solutions that we might have are different. Jobs are tied, unfortunately, to natural resource extraction, selling raw material to the industrial economies, and talking about those things, trying to defend those things, trying to remind ourselves and our next generations and our people and our policymakers about the value of the resources that we are losing, and is important, and I think can be game changers. Like, we all love our country and we love our nature. Even if we are nationalists, we can fight for protection of our environment. And if we are nationalists, we have to be concerned about climate change. And if we are nationalists, we want to become global, contribute to play a better role at the global level. I'm glad that eventually we are seeing that change of attitude in the United States of America.
Yeah. And let's talk a little bit about your work modeling water management. We have one person specifically curious if you could highlight how water scarcity will affect geopolitical relations in the future.
A lot of politicians have been talking about water wars or major water conflicts. Some people have been attributing the current Syrian crisis to for example, a drought. It is true that geopolitics would be affected by the resources scarcity, and in places like the Middle East, where water is scarce and food production is dependent on water, jobs are dependent on water, of course, we would see increasing tension. But one thing when we talk about the lack of resources and resource scarcity is to understand the level. We have, at one level, we have, possible tensions between countries, and at the other level we have tensions and fights between farmers, between the people whose lives are dependent on water, and they lose their life when water becomes scarce, like the farmers who are committing suicide in different parts of the world because there is water shortage, because they lose their jobs. So it is important to understand the human security connection to water shortage in that part of the region. Middle East, in many countries in the Middle East, more than 90% of water is withdrawn for agricultural purposes, for food production, and for creating jobs. Unless these countries can find a way to secure their food supply, they might not be able to address their water shortage problem and actually adapt themselves to climate change and try to be strong players when it comes to climate change mitigation.
We have a question about nuclear energy. Is it safe in your opinion or not really?
Scientists are I think entitled to have their own opinion, but I can only comment on what I have done research on. So my personal opinion doesn't matter here. And we are, especially we have a lot of people from Iran, a nation which is paying a big price for generations for wanting to have a nuclear access to nuclear energy. Hopefully not nuclear bomb. Nuclear energy, over years, with the change in science, with the understanding of trade-offs, risk, and everything, we have a lot of scientists have a better feeling about nuclear energy, thinking about its water footprint, carbon footprint, land footprint, and its cost at the same time, and how much it can contribute to cleaner energy production in the future. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that we should lose our concerns that we have about nuclear energy in terms of nuclear waste and the disaster that can be created if there is a failure of nuclear plants. We have already seen how nations, how communities suffer for generations because of nuclear plants failure. Those things are real, and it means that they encourage us to do more exploration, do more for the safety of these plants. But at the same time, we have to understand that there are trade-offs. There are things that, there are also promising aspects that we have to seriously consider, even if we have a bad memory. And we can't lose our bias and explore this further and further. We're not at a point that scientists can go out and promise that nuclear energy is the cleanest thing to go with, and nuclear energy is the solution to climate change. But for us, our research in the MENA region, Middle East and North Africa, for example, suggests that nuclear energy is one of the promising energy. It can be much better than, for example, what the Middle Eastern leaders like, hydropower, which is, we sell it as renewable. We say it's clean, but it's not, because it wastes a lot of water. A lot of water gets evaporated from reservoirs. Reservoirs come with a lot of damages to the ecosystem, and a lot of human damages to the communities, and so on. So comparing these situations, can be different. But we're when it comes to countries like Iran, where the whole world is fighting with the country over nuclear power, this story is totally different. The Iranian nation has to choose if they want to get access to this energy, considering its environmental risk, considering its safety risk, and considering all the pressure that the nation has to deal with.
And I love this question. What gives you the most hope for our world's future?
Our brain. I think we are smart. We are selfish as humans. We are selfish, but we are smart. We have gone through a lot of disasters in the past, and every time disasters have taught us lessons, and we have stood up and fought. Sometimes we have paid a high price, like what we have seen over the past few years with the the COVID-19 crisis. But we also, when the pressure goes up, we try hard to fix the problem. That being said, doesn't mean So I say this guy, it's not the end of the world, right? And if we lose hope, I think if we I think promote this story that the end of the world is coming, like in a few years, we lose hope. And if we lose hope, the environmental sector becomes one of the very first victims, because there are so many other things which politicians prioritize over the environmental sector. We are smart. We can innovate. We can learn, from our mistakes, and we can do a better job. Though we have to pay attention to the fact that, the fairness issues that I raised. This game is ugly in a sense that it's an unfair game. The amount of suffering that we expect because of climate change and because of environmental problems that we are dealing with today is different in different nations. Like the coronavirus. Look at what is happening in India right now. Look at what is happening in Europe. When it came to the vaccination, when it came to using resources, when it came to stimulus packages, the countries which were richer could handle the problem, even though the virus was the same. It was killing, in the same way. Our bodies are the same, but eventually those countries which are poorer, the poorer nation, are paying a higher price for this global problem. I'm afraid the same thing, should be expected when it comes to climate change, because the poor nations would be suffering more and they would lose more. And this is what we need to worry about at the same time that we are hopeful. that we can come up with our own narrative. We can promote the narratives of the developing world. We can buy respect for an appreciation for what the developing world thinks and how they want the problem to be solved. But we also have to be realistic about what we can do.
Great. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Thank you, Kaveh, so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you. And thank you all who joined us from different parts of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. And Kaveh will be with us again tomorrow on Reddit for our AMA with all 6 scientists from the Hot List series. So we'll be starting that up at noon, and Kaveh will be joining us later on around 4 p.m. Eastern. So if we didn't get to your question, we got a ton of them. If we didn't get to your question, head over to the Ask Science subreddit tomorrow, and Kaveh will answer a bunch more. Our Reddit username is Reuters. So we'll see you then.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to it.